Welcome, everyone. I want to talk about the future of aged care. This is one of the topics that I talk about under my Disruption by Design banner, and it's looking at the future. And today we're looking at the aged care sector, which is a sector that's going through a lot of change. At the moment, it's been through a lot of change and is going through even more. And I want to help you understand a little bit about what's coming up for us in the future of aged care, especially if you work in the sector, and also how you can be proactive so that you're not just at the mercy of change, but that you can be part of making that change happen as well. So I love this quotation from Tolkien from his book The Hobbit, and he says if there's a live dragon somewhere near you and you're doing your planning, it's a pretty good idea to include him in your planning. And I reckon that's true in many industries, and it's true of aged care as well. There are a lot of changes happening. There's lots of things coming up in the future, and there are some dragons lurking around the corners. And today, let me expose you to some of those dragons and some of those things in the future so you can use them in your planning. My regular webinar attendees will know my rules of engagement. But if you're new, and I can see a lot of people who are new to today's webcast, broadly my 3 rules of engagement I'd like you to think. So take some time outside your busy work life to just do some thinking today about the future, because many of us don't have the opportunity to do that. You don't have to worry about taking frantic notes, because the recording of this will be available later, and I'll send a link out to you. But also be a bit playful as you go, so there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions, for as you do your thinking, to think a little bit differently, think a little bit out of the box, and just play around a little bit with some ideas that you may or may not then take and use in your organization. But I do want you to have things that you can put into practice and take action from. So, my name's Gihan Pereira. I'm a futurist, a conference speaker, an author, and I work with a number of industries. In fact, here's a list of some of my recent clients, and this is only a small sample, but I've chosen this sample because you can see there's some people who are large organizations, smaller organizations, not-for-profits, government, commercial, all over the spectrum of industries, organization size and purpose. And they're all facing an uncertain future. We all are. And when people say to me, we're going through a major change process at the moment, I say, well, yes, and so is everybody else. And everyone's going through change, whether you're doing it formally or not. And in this sector, the aged care sector, there seems to be a lot of change happening, not just with things like the Royal Commission, but with other things as well that are based around what society is doing. So my book, Disruption by Design, which I've recently published, is all about how you lead the change. And you can see the subtitle here is Leading the Change in a fast-changing world, because our world is changing fast, and you can either wait for the change to happen and then hope that you can respond in time, or you can lead the change. And today is all about understanding a little bit about, in this case, the aged care sector, and how you can lead the change there. I'm going to send you a copy of the planning chapter from this book if you complete the exit survey. So we'll talk a little bit about foresight and how you plan for the future, and I'll send you that chapter from the book if you complete the exit survey. I've written a lot of books. This is book number 12. Many of them are now out of print because they were about earlier technology. The three main flagship books that I've written. Almost a decade ago, I wrote this book, Fast, Flat and Free, which is all about, remember at that time, just at the start of the really everyone jumping on the internet bandwagon. It was past the .com boom and bust, but everyone was looking at how do we integrate the internet into our business. And more recently, I then wrote this book, The Future of Leadership, because we all understood that the internet was changing our world. So how can we lead effectively in that changed world? And now I've written this book, Disruption by Design, which is all about innovation. So how do you disrupt from the inside out rather than waiting to be disrupted? Okay, so let's check who's in the room. So I'm going to do a couple of polls as we go through today. And the first one's a really easy one. It's very broad. What's your main role? So I'm going to launch this poll and ask you to respond to it. It's very easy. If you haven't done one of these polls before, just choose one of the options. I've made them very broad. So, but we'll just see who's in the room. Okay, so about half the people have voted. I wait till about 80%. Okay, lots of people, almost everyone's voted now. So thank you for responding quickly. That does help. Yeah, okay. So if we have a look at the results, most people here are senior leaders in their organizations, which is great because we're talking about some high level things here when we look at the future of aged care. So some of the things that we're talking about are things that you can have some impact on, and that you can affect. And I hope that you will come away from this webcast with some things that you can put into practice. Let me tell you the big picture first around what's happening with most organizations and how disruption happens. So most organizations go through these three growth phases. So when they start, they understand that there's a need in the community or in the world. So they find customers, let's call them customers, consumers, whatever we call them, and they've got a problem that needs solving. And so you build an organization that can solve those problems. So everyone strives really hard, you're succeeding, you hire people with the skills to solve those problems, and then that the organization grows. And in the aged care sector, it's typically people who need high quality care as they get towards the end of their life. And it's tended to be in the past residential aged care. So those are the problems that you're solving. What happens then is that you start off with the skills and talents to be able to solve those problems, and your organization does that. But in the second stage, there are now still some people with those same needs and they have the same problems, and so you can offer your solutions and they work for them. But there are also a new kind of customer or consumer or client with different needs, and if you try to solve them with the same solutions that you've always offered in the past, it's like square pegs in a round hole, or the other way around, because now it's changing. So you can still survive, but you're struggling to survive because there are fewer and fewer people with those problems that you were equipped to solve. So the organizations that thrive are the ones who recognize that customers, consumers, clients have a different set of problems now. So they're different people with different needs and they want different solutions. And if you can adapt and you can change your organization to solve those new problems, and you have people, you're either hiring new people or you upskill your people to be able to solve those problems, great, you'll thrive. But if you don't, and you're still solving the old problems that customers no longer want, so you're now finding a disease for which you're now finding a cure for which there's no known disease anymore, then your organization will nosedive. And this happens in many industries, not just in aged care, but it's particularly true in aged care because the problems that you're solving, or the problems that customers and consumers and clients want solved now may be very different from what you're equipped to solve. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge in many industries, and I'll show you why it's a challenge in aged care as well. So the organizations who are innovative are the ones who adapt and they thrive. The ones who are disrupted are the ones who don't adapt, they don't innovate. And innovation and disruption are exactly the same thing. So we think of disruption as something that happens to you, and innovation is something that you do. And that's exactly what it is. They're exactly the same thing. It's just disruption when it happens to you, and it's innovation when you do it yourself. Okay, so how do you be one of those innovators? And we're specifically going to talk about, so this is a big picture, we're specifically going to talk about aged care, but the three things that you need are: one, of course, you need to understand your customers, consumers, clients, and understand what their problems are. And then make sure that you have the right skills and talent in your team to be able to solve those problems. So those are three things: customers, problems, and talent. And in aged care, as in many other sectors, all those three things have changed. We've got a new kind of consumer or client who is looking for services from the sector. We've got different problems or aspirations that they have. So they have different needs now, and they may be different from what you've been offering in the past. And you also need a different kind of staffing to be able to solve those problems. So we're going to look at 5 major trends in the aged care sector. Now you might go, here we go again, because, and I did just a little bit of research. I haven't been looking at the sector for as long as this, but I did look at some of the major changes that have happened to the sector. And a lot of the changes, of course, happen because of government regulation and because of reviews and because of things that are outside your control. And we've gone all the way back. So I went back to more than 20 years ago to changes that have happened. And if you've been in this sector for a while, you'd have gone through all these changes, and there are a lot of them coming up to now. Last year with the Royal Commission, which is still ongoing at the moment, and starting from just a few days ago, the aged care quality standards, which are now come into play in Australia. So there's been a lot of change, but uh, I'd like you to think about, not only has there been a lot of change, but there's going to be even more change coming in the future. And not all of it is coming from, it's not going to be imposed from outside in terms of regulation. A lot of that is going to happen organically as a result of changes in demographics, changes in people, and in terms of what they want, and also in terms of your staff and your team that you bring into it, that are coming into the sector. Okay, so let's look at these 5 trends, and let me give you an overview of the 5 trends we're going to look at, and then we'll look at each of them in turn. So the first trend is, and I'll just describe them briefly here. The first one is that funding is going to change from beds to consumers very broadly. It's going to go from the funding going to from the provider to the consumer. And the second one is the sort of value that you offer is, or your value proposition is going to change as well. So rather than only or primarily providing accommodation or residential care, it's actually going to look at how else you can care for your consumers or clients. The place which is related to that is we're going to go from, the aged care sector is going to go from buildings to communities. So aged care is going to be provided by broadly the community. We're going to look at who's going to own the aged care and aged care services. So it's going to go from the provider to actually being shared, and it's going to be co-creating the services and that you provide with the people that you provide them to. And lastly, we're going to look at culture. So how do you create an internal culture with your team to make sure that you can provide the services, especially in this fast-changing world? So we're not going to look at all of them in the same level of depth. In fact, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this last one around culture, because I want to give you stuff that you can take away and put into practice. And that means that you need the right people, not just the right strategy. So of course you need strategy and culture, but you definitely need the right people to lead you into the future. So these are 5 things we're going to talk about. Let me just quickly check if there's any questions or comments about those 5. I've grouped them, and this arrow going from red to green is saying here are the things that many people are scared about or concerned about or disturb people about: changes to funding, changes to the value proposition, and so on. And then we're moving into this green area, which is the thing that's going to drive you forward, very much about your team. Okay, let me just see if there's questions or comments. I haven't seen anything yet, but I will stop as we go through for you to ask me questions as we go. Okay, so here's a big change that's happened, and we see it everywhere. We see it in, I speak at lots of conferences, and lots of other speakers are talking about the change in Australia in our population. And a generation ago, this is what our population mix looked like. So lots of babies and young people, not very many older people. A little bit later, so in 2011, in that census showed that that was changing. So there's more of a bulge around these middle age groups, and the ABS predicts that by 2050, we're going to have a much more even distribution of population growth. So for the aged care sector, of course, that means that it's a fast growing sector and an area that's going to need a lot more support and a lot more resources in the future. So it's not a surprise that there's a lot of focus on aged care, because we're looking at an aging population who need these resources, but also the population is aging, and so people are going to live longer, but also they're going to live healthier. So some of their needs are going to change. Okay, so that's a very big picture. Let's look at this first area of funding. So if I can say broadly, the change in funding is going to go from, I've described it here as from beds to consumers, but essentially it's from the provider to the client. So, and you've seen this, you've seen the changes that are happening where clients get more control, have more control, have more discretion over how the funding works. And this is not just in the aged care sector. This, of course, it happens everywhere. It happens everywhere in society, that the power has gone from the provider or the salesperson or the organization to the customer or the consumer. You know this if you've bought a car recently. So in the old days, the way you buy a car was you go to a car yard, and the salespeople and the dealership has all the power, and that's changed now. So now you do all your research online, you do price comparison, you look at online reviews, you decide where you're going to go, and then you turn up at a dealership. And the dealership is lucky if you happen to have chosen them. And then after that, so you've still, as a customer, got all the power. And that's what's happening with the aged care sector as well. So even though we're seeing it happen in this sector, and it's a significant change, it's a change that's happening in pretty much every other sector in society as well. And if you look at this whole idea, I said that the population is not just changing and getting older, but is getting healthier. So if we're saying here that we're going to have people in the older age brackets from 70, 80, 90, even 100 plus by 2050. But it's not even that. So at the moment, there is at the moment, current life expectancy in Australia is around the mid-80s, but is this the best that we can do? So what if we got to this point where at the moment, so this is what I've graphed life expectancy here over the last 100 years or so. What if by in this next century that people were living to not just 100, but 150 and 200. And that seems crazy. That seems, how could you live that long? But there's this thing called there's a science called life extension science, which is looking at exactly this situation. So how do you, technology and biology, how do we combine them to increase our life expectancy? And at the moment, so the idea is that aging is getting, so anti-aging is getting better and better every year. And soon we'll be at the point where the technology is growing so fast that we're adding an extra year to life faster than every year. So for most of us, it's a little bit too late for us, but I've got a 9-year-old niece who might live to 100, well, almost certainly live to 100 if nothing goes wrong, but quite possible that she'll live to 150 and maybe even older than that. And the thing is, you'd say, who wants to live to 150? But if you could live to 150 with the same level of health and fitness, mentally and physically, as you had when you were 50, well, why wouldn't you? So this is what's happening. So all of this green area is a little bit speculative, but it's something that is not unrealistic. And so when you think about the aged care sector now, is it going to be catering for people who might be in that sector for 100 years and requiring a different quality of life than maybe what you're solving now, than maybe what the sector at the moment is offering now. So some of this is a little bit speculative, but I want to start with something that's a little bit out there because it is something that is significant for the sector. And so I'll come back to the question that I ask all my clients is, what problem are you really solving? And aged care has been about caring for people and giving them a high quality of life as they get towards the end of their life. And that has been the problem that the aged care sector has solved in the past. Is it the same problem that is solving in the future? Okay, and that's the question I want to ask you, and I want you to ask yourselves. So let me give you an example. Let me look away from aged care, and let's look at the question of money. Okay, look, and I'll use this as an analogy for aged care. So my partner Nikki and I, we went off to Broome last weekend. So we had a few days, Northwest Australia, getting away from the winter cold. We had a fantastic 4 days there. And okay, so we went to a restaurant and we had breakfast. Now imagine if there was no such thing as money. So the restaurant provided this service. We enjoyed it, so there's a product and a service that goes along with it. We enjoyed it, and at the end we had to pay, but money didn't exist. So how could we do it? So what would you do, and why was money invented? Well, the reason for this is I could have taken along one of my books and said, here's a copy of my book, Disruption by Design, retails for $35. I'm happy to give you 2 books, and that covers breakfast and coffees, and you can have a little bit of a bonus. And the restaurant would have said, no, actually, we don't need it. We don't need the book. That's not something we wanted. So that transaction doesn't work. So that's why money was invented. So money was invented because people have different needs, and we had to have some common form of exchange. So let's say so that's why. They wouldn't accept the book, but they would accept our cash. They would also, of course, accept credit cards. And those are 2 common ways to pay at the moment, and 2 common ways that we have this thing called money. That means that we don't have to rely on barter anymore. However, if money didn't exist at all and we were inventing money right now in 2019, what would we do? Well, everyone's walking around with an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or some other device. You wouldn't even think about printing money. You wouldn't even think about carrying around plastic cards with you. You'd say, well, everyone's got this device or they've got their phone. Money is going to be just something that's available on some sort of wearable device or on your phone. And so you wouldn't even think about creating these past things. And we're moving towards a cashless society, and even credit cards. Credit cards have become largely, or in a large way, redundant now because we do have smartphones and watches and so on. So we still have cash and cards, but that's only because they were useful and they were required to solve the problem in the past. We don't need them now because we've got another way to solve that problem of getting over barter and making sure that two people are happy with the transaction. So here's my point. So how do you make sure that the problem you're solving is a problem that clients still want solved? Airbnb, as another example, Airbnb started off, as you know, selling rooms, offering rooms at a lower rate. So you could hire out a room in your home. But Airbnb realized that their customers, the people who were booking the rooms, they were actually looking for travel experiences. So Airbnb has now transformed from just an accommodation provider to a travel experience provider. And if you've used Airbnb recently, you'd notice that you go and book a room, but it immediately tells you what else is available in the area, and you can book other services and tours and other parts of that experience when you go there, because Airbnb realized that the problem they were solving was not just providing a roof over your head when you're somewhere else, but to provide that whole experience. So as we come back to the aged care sector, I'd like you to think about what problem are you really solving for your clients and your consumers. And it may be very different from the problem that so the question is, what problem are you going to be solving? And it may be different from the problem that you're solving right now, which in a lot of cases is just looking at people, looking after people, giving them a higher quality of life post-retirement. Okay, so that's what the aged care sector has traditionally solved, and it has done it by providing a residential aged care facility for them. Typically, not entirely, but typically. So what problem are you going to be solving in the future? Okay, so I don't want to get into all the details of why the funding is done this way and how you can get more funding and how you can take advantage of the new model of funding, but I do want you to think about that, that the funding is going to the consumers and the clients, and they're going to then invest that with the people who are solving the problems that they really want solved now, which may have been different from the past. Okay, questions or comments? I'm happy to take any now as we go. Yeah, so Joan says, and we're going to get to this when we're talking about place and value. It's difficult when you own a residential care facility. And absolutely right. So some of the assets, that's been a real asset for you in the past, but it may not be in the future. In fact, that leads into very nicely into the next point here, which is the value that you provide. So it's not just about providing accommodation and the services that go around with that, but it's about what's the care that you actually provide. So Diane says, making a lot of sense. So this is an apocryphal story. So it's not actually true. So I looked it up, and it says there's no real proof that this actually happened, but a journalist asked a bank robber after he was caught, why do you rob banks? And Willie Sutton, the robber, said, because that's where the money is. Okay, and so and it totally makes sense, right? So that's where the money is or used to be, and that's not the case anymore. And so let me give you some examples. So banks are the place that money used to be. Hospitals are the place. So people used to go to hospitals because that's where the medical equipment and the specialists were available. So the building housed those, and it was convenient to have them there. People used to go to schools and libraries, or schools and libraries were important because as a campus, because that's where the library books were, that's where the staff were, that's where the other students would hang out. And people used to think of offices, like offices were invented because that's where the files were, that's where the secretarial staff were, that's where you could get together with your colleagues for meetings. But none of those things are essential anymore. So these are solving hold problems. You don't need to go to the bank to get money. You increasingly don't need to go to the hospital to get healthcare. You definitely don't need to go to schools and universities to get learning. And you don't even, in many cases, need to go to an office to be able to be productive at work. And the same is true of aged care facilities. It's a challenge, because if you've created this residential facility because that's the best way to provide the service, and it's not anymore, then adapt and innovate, or there's a real risk that you'll be disrupted. So, for example, there's a Melbourne company here that's created these smart plugs, and the smart plugs monitor activity and behavior around the home. So people who want to live from home and still want to be independent, living from home, they have these smart plugs. They plug them in, and they transmit data. And what they're looking at are patterns of behavior. So if they see that somebody hasn't, like they use a kettle at a certain time every day and they haven't, then first they'll notify the family, and then they'll notify emergency services if it gets to that point. There are plenty of other services like this. Billy Care is another one where they have sensors around the house which monitor things like movement, temperature, and this is where artificial intelligence comes in. They monitor things like behavior as well, so they can look at behavioral patterns to be able to alert other people to potential dangers. So one of the big benefits that a residential facility used to provide now no longer needs to be provided in residential facilities. So we're moving away from accommodation to actually, let's look at the care service that we're providing. Okay, so the next one. So as you can see, I'm not going to go through any of these in a lot of detail, but I will give you some other resources that you can look at as well later. So we're moving away from buildings, as I said, residential. So where's the service going to be provided? So it's not going to be only provided in the residential buildings. It's going to be provided in the community. So this could be the broader community, or it could be specific aged care communities. So Belmere in Queensland, they've built a specific, what they call a micro town, which is an aged care, which is 100% aged care facility. In Perth, in Western Australia, Silver Chain Nursing, they have holographic doctors. So they beam a doctor using a hologram into your home, and you can have a consultation with that doctor rather than you having to go to them. So this, as I said, this is one of the big differences. So you don't have to go to them anymore, in the same way you don't have to go to a hospital, because the healthcare can happen, even to the extent of specialist consultations in the home. I'm only going to give you a couple of examples here because of our time, but if you want to see some other examples, I've created this little video here. As you can see here, 10 innovative aged care ideas in Australia. Just go to my website at gihanperero.tv and you can watch that. So the couple of examples I've shown you already are in there, but there are some others as well. Okay, let me just stop and see if there's questions and comments. Okay, I'm just going to give you a chance to type anything if you want to. Okay, let me continue. So the next one's a really interesting one, and it's happening in a lot of sectors, a lot of industries, is who owns the service. And the service has traditionally been owned by the provider, in the same way as banking's been owned by the banks, and retail shopping has been owned by the shopkeeper. But now that's changing, and it's changing in the aged care sector as well. And the big shift is that we're going to co-creation of the solution. So it's not just the providers, but it's also the consumers and clients. In South Australia, the Department of Families and Communities, with Housing South Australia, they did some research, and they were looking at how do we create a better community for seniors who want to live at home. And what they did was, rather than the government and the public service deciding how that worked, they set up a 90-day project where they invited a number of stakeholders in, including architects, urban planners, and of course, the people who would be most affected by it as well. And they came up with ideas of how they were going to create aged care services in place in the community. And more, this is going to be what people want to do, because we've got smart people who are moving, who are going to be your consumers and clients. And you know this, that there's some people who definitely there's like dementia, Alzheimer's, there's a big issues, but there's also really smart people who have come from they're very tech savvy. They've come from a corporate background. They've raised families. They understand collaboration, and they want to be part of the solutions. And in the past, it hasn't always been easy for them to do that, but in the future, they're not only going to want it, they're going to demand it. The quality, something's gone wrong with a couple of my little icons here. The recent quality standards, you can read them a couple of ways. You can read them as this is the minimum we need to do to be able to be compliant with the quality standards, or you can look at them as a set of really strong positive guidelines for how we can, as a blueprint for how we build our services in the future. And I think of the 8 quality standards, 4 of them we can use as here's how we do talk about a co-creation of services. So certainly the first one, which is all about dignity and choice, is very much about and if you read them, it says different people will have different choices and different priorities. We talk about ongoing assessment and planning, which is very much about that co-creation, the service environment that you create, and the way that you manage feedback and complaints, which is not only a negative thing, it's also, if you're proactively looking for feedback, it means that you can actively build better services. I've got a whole section, so I run a whole workshop all around how do you make sure that you bring your customers in to co-create with you. So I won't go into a lot of detail there, but let me just see if anyone's got any questions around this. I know that people in the sector will be familiar with some of these new, with the quality standards and some of the implications of them. But when I talk to people in the sector, by and large, they're talking about how do we make sure that we're compliant with them, which is good because you need to be compliant, but compliant is just the price of entry now. What I'd rather say is how do we use these as a launch pad for being proactive about creating the aged care services of the future. Okay, let me check for questions or comments. Yes, there's a comment here saying that it shouldn't only be about complaints, it should also be about feedback. And that's exactly right. So often we look at the feedback as being negative feedback, but it doesn't have to be. And feedback should be a positive feedback loop to make sure that you're actually getting input. So feedback is all about collaboration rather than being about complaints and things that need to be fixed. It's about moving forward. Okay, let's look at this last area here, which I think is the most important one in any organization, and it's about your culture. And it's the culture. So this is the internal culture that you have within your organization, because that's really going to drive you into the future. So you can use these other things here to look at your strategy, but then how do you drive that in your organization? And it comes down to your people. One of my clients, who some of you will know, Dr. Nikki Howe from Southcare, she says this. I was interviewing her a couple of years ago, and she said, didn't you employ knowledge workers for their knowledge? So are you tapping into their skills, their talent, their knowledge? And I've specifically called this talent. As you can see here, if I go back to this slide, it says we're going from staff to talent. So staff, a staff member is an extra pair of hands and legs who can do work. Talent are people who are talented and who can actually add to the culture because of their unique skills and values. So this is a challenge, and many organizations are finding that the search for high quality talent has never been as challenging as it is now. And the aged care sector traditionally hasn't been seen as a sexy sector for the top talent. However, I think that's going to change because healthcare and aged care, because of our aging population and because of big data and artificial intelligence that's going to affect that, is going to be an area that those two areas are going to attract high quality talent. The question is, are they going to want to work in your organization? So I've got a little bit of I've got a poll here. So let me explain the poll first, and then I'll ask you what your workplace is like. So we're looking at the culture of your workplace and the general feel of your workplace. So I reckon workplaces fall into these 6 categories, and then I'm going to ask you which one of these 6 yours falls into. So the first one is, and this is all about how you manage change and how you're ready for the future. So are you complacent? Have you got a workplace that doesn't really look at what's happening outside? You just do your day-to-day job and don't really care what's happening outside. Okay, I'm assuming people here on this webcast aren't in that category, so we'll skip that one. The next one is where you're resistant. So people in the workplace recognize that change is happening, but they resist it. They act, but all their action is about trying to restore the status quo rather than moving forward. And the next one is compliant. They realize that change is happening and they realize they need to change, and they're just sitting around saying, okay, tell me what to do and I'll do it. So they're passive, they're not resisting it, they'll do what they're asked to do, but that's all. So they're compliant and they won't actually take any action themselves. Okay, so those 3 are not very high energy. So if this is your culture, then your batteries aren't charged. People don't feel energized when they come to work. Let's look at 3, which are a little bit more energized. So the next one is the engaged workplace. So this is where people say, we know that change is happening and we recognize that we can do something about it. So we're going to be proactive about it. We're going to take some actions to change, or at the very least, we're going to make some suggestions about how we can move forward proactively. That's good, but you can do better. The next one is motivated. So this is people who come to work saying, I recognize that my work has meaning more than the paycheck, more than money. And because I've got a passion, I've got a passion to make a difference in the world, and my workplace where I work has a purpose that's aligned with that passion. That's good. And the very best one is the inspired workplace, where these are the people who are the disruptors, who are not just not going to be disrupted. They come to work because this is really it's helping them fulfill their life's purpose, and they realize they're making a change in the world. So what is your workplace like? So I'm going to run a little poll here, and the polls, by the way, are anonymous, so you can be as honest in this workplace in this poll as you like. And I'm not going to choose the first one, so it's one of these 5 choices. So we've got resistant, so you're pushing back against change; compliant, where your people are happy to do work but only if they're told to; engaged, where they're being proactive; motivated, where they feel that their passion's aligned with the workplace purpose; and inspired, where they love work and they do it even if they weren't being paid to do it. Okay, good. Thank you so much for voting quickly. Great. Most people have voted now, so let me close the poll and I'll share the results with you. Okay, so this is great to see that, yeah, fantastic. Fantastic to see so many people here say that their workplace is either engaged or motivated, and even a few that say inspired. So that's fantastic. It's really wonderful to see. And I do know that when I run this survey on my webcast, I do get this kind of split, but generally speaking, and if you've seen things like Gallup polls around engagement, you know that that's not the case in most workplaces. So we're a little bit self-selecting here because of the people who are on today's webcast, but that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the engaged, motivated, or inspired workplaces, and making sure that continues to happen even with some of the changes that are coming soon. And so, for example, one of the big changes that's happening is automation, and there's this term called robophobia. So people who are scared or worried that their jobs are going to be automated or either going to be automated and completely replaced or largely replaced in the future, and they're going to be redundant. And it's not there's some reason to be concerned about that. So 40% of jobs in Australia, according to the Australian government, are likely to be automated in the next 10 to 15 years. So it's not like the robots are coming for every job, but 40% is not insignificant. Dell did some research around with the leaders, and they said most leaders, 80%, expect employees and machines to work as integrated teams within the next few years. And I think this is the secret. It's not that you're necessarily going to be replaced by robots or AI, but that you're going to be working together. So humans and machines are better together. If you go to my website, where I've got a video about that, because I think this is the future of artificial intelligence. It's not that it's going to replace us, it's that it's going to help us do our jobs better. And if we understand that, then it makes it easier for us to use it, and actually makes it very powerful. Okay, another poll here. We're talking about diversity and inclusion here. So diversity is like having a whole bunch of different colored crayons. Inclusion is about using all of them when you're working as an artist. Okay, so let me run this poll here. Employees inclusive teams are. So this is some research that was done by Suncorp. And this one, I'm asking you to guess what the research showed. So pick one of these 4 options. So employees inclusive teams. So these are teams where people with the organization or the team leaders do embrace the diversity in the team, and they see that as a positive, not just something to tolerate. Okay, great. So most people have voted. So let me close the poll and share those results. Okay, so it's kind of all over the place here. But okay, you can see what people say there. This is a little bit of a trick question, because the actual answer is all of the above. Okay, so the Suncorp research showed that if you've got an inclusive team, your employees are going to be more innovative, more effective, it's easier to keep them, and they're going to be more satisfied with their jobs. So diversity and inclusion are key factors in building a highly effective and highly productive team. There is, again, another video, because I don't want to go into the details here, but again, you can have a look at on the website. I've created a video, 10 Ways to be a Talent Magnet in 2019. And this is based on research, like the research I've been quoting here. So if you want to find ways to improve the culture of your team and make sure that you're attracting and keeping the best people so that you're fit for the future, then have a look at that video there as well. Okay, so in summary, and I've got a little bit of a thing to do, a little bit of information to give you after this, but in summary, here are the 5 trends that we've looked at. So the funding one is not so much about money, but it's about where the money goes. And it's saying that the money is going to go, the control is going to go to your consumers or clients, and they're going to decide what value you offer, where you're going to offer that value, and how they can be part of co-creating the service with you. And then for you, the thing that I think you need to focus on is the culture, that the team that you've got and the talent in that team. I just want to quickly check if there's any last comments or questions. The timing is perfect at the moment. Okay, I see a few thank yous coming in. Yeah, okay, so, and I'll keep this anonymous, but I'll read out the comment here. So this person says, the issue for me is I'm motivated and inspired, as are my team, but the organization we work within hangs between resistant and compliant, and we're stuck to tied government funding. Help. Okay, so, and this is a real challenge, that you might be an internal leader and you can only do so much. But however, so in my experience working with leaders in a lot of teams and a lot of industries, most leaders don't realize just how much control they actually have. And my previous book, The Future of Leadership, I'm not trying to promote the book, but I just mentioned that The Future of Leadership was not written for senior leaders and business owners. It was written for internal leaders within teams, so they can make a difference for their teams, and then that might filter through to the rest of the organization. And it's a challenge. It's not easy, but as a leader, I think your role, I won't say who it is, but I think your role is to be that shining light, which then maybe the rest of the organization can pick up on. But even if they don't, at least you do the best that you can for your team. But I do recognize it's a challenging situation. Okay, so a few more thank yous coming in. So let me just mention a couple of other things that I have got coming up. So thank you very much for being part of this webcast. If you're in Perth or Melbourne, I run these 2-hour workshops for my clients, so people who I've worked with before, but I'm more than happy for anyone on this webcast if you'd like to attend. If you're in Perth and Melbourne and you're available on these 2 days, 24th of July or the 30th of July in Melbourne, then just drop me a line and I'd be very happy to send you an invitation to that one. The Perth one, we're almost full now, so it's a small group, so it's only up to 15 people typically, and we do a 2-hour workshop which is all around future thinking and to help you with your strategic planning. If you're interested in that, come along as my guest. Just drop me a line and I can send you an invitation. Other ways that you can work with me, I do have this whole area of disruption and innovation. I have a conference keynote around that. I run a workshop around that. And I also do leadership coaching for people who want ongoing access to me. So the workshop that I run is a half-day workshop where we look at some of the external pressures, and we do this around your industry. So this will be around aged care. And then I'll help you with some decision making so you can decide which things you're going to build into your strategy and then how you integrate them into your organization. The leadership coaching is a monthly program. So the monthly program has services for you, for you work with peers, and you work and you get some value for your team. So you can call me anytime. We can set up coaching conversations anytime you want to. So you get access to me, and not many people get that except through this program. For the other thing I do is a group coaching call. So once a month we get together and we do a group online coaching video conference call. And as you've probably gathered, I love the idea of diversity and getting ideas from different industries, different backgrounds. Cognitive diversity, I think, is a huge benefit in today's world. And so that's the idea of that. So it's not just coaching from me, but it's input from peers as well. And in the group, we've got some from aged care. We've got people from the events industry, from legal, from real estate, from other sectors as well. And so we get together and we get ideas from different people. And every month I run a skills webinar, which your team members can attend. And so some of the skills are around productivity, they're about teamwork, they're about better decision making. So everybody in your organization can attend as well. So it's part of the coaching. So if you're interested in that, so you get the access to me, diversity from your peers, and skills for your team, then let me know. Some people say that the value that they get is, if they only got the skills training for the team members, that's good enough. Others say if they just get access to me, that's good enough, and so on. But these are all combined. And if you're interested, just drop me a line by email, and I'd be happy to have a chat with you about that. It's an ongoing program, so you can join whenever you like. Okay, so the last thing before we finish up, as I said, just a reminder again that I've got this little puzzle for you. Let's see if that's coming up. Oh, yeah, here it is. Here it is. Okay, good. I hope you can see that on the screen, the lily pad. I don't know, the technology was not just working for a sec. Okay, so this is a puzzle that I heard when I was or read when I was a kid. So you may have come across it before, and that's fine. And I'm going to ask you, there's no prizes for this, but I'm going to ask you when I get to the question, if you can type your answer in the question box. Okay, so here's how the puzzle works. There's a pond with a lily pad on it. Actually, there's only one lily in it. And the number of lilies doubles every day. So the first day there's 1, the next day there's 2, the next day there's 4, the next day there's 8, 16, 32, and so on. The pond fills in 28 days. The question is, when is it half full? Okay, so that's my question. Let's see if I see any answers coming through. Just type in your answer in the question box. Okay, so Tony's already got the right answer. Okay, yep, so Tony's got the right answer, 27 days. Okay, so it's half full in 27 days. Let me show you why. So day 28, it's 100% full. Remember, it doubles every day. So the previous day, it was half full, and then that doubled to 28. Okay, so that's a puzzle. That's the original puzzle that I read about as a kid. You can share that with your friends and family and amaze them with that. And some people get it, some people don't. So I was doing this strategic planning with a group of accountants a few weeks ago, and as soon as I said the question, everybody in the room said 27 days, except for the two other facilitators at the back who brought me in. They were doing the day's facilitation. They brought me in to run the first session, and they said, "Oh, can you just explain this for the two non-accountants in the room?" So here's the explanation. But that's not my point. So here's my point. Let's go back a few more days. So day 26, it was only a quarter full. The day before that, it was 1/8, and then back. So day 24 is about 6%. Day 23, if you go back to the start of the week, it was only about 1% full, 1 to 2% full. And that's not even counting the first 3 weeks. So in 4 weeks, it fills. The first 3 weeks is tiny amount of lilies, and then suddenly it grows. And this is what happens with exponential growth. And many people can't understand exponential growth. Albert Einstein described it as the eighth wonder of the world because it is quite hard to wrap your mind around. But this is what's happening in our world now, that our world is advancing exponentially. So technology is doubling. So there's a thing called Moore's law that says technology doubles every 18 to 24 months. But it's not just technology, it's also people, because we're now connected more with social media and online networks, and networks are exponential as well. So you could imagine that if you were looking at this lily pad, for the first 3 weeks, almost nothing happens. The start of the fourth week, even now, there's almost nothing. And you may think, well, nothing's going to happen. But then suddenly in that last week, you get this massive exponential growth. And many leaders and organizations, they look around and they say, well, you know what, this is only going to affect 1% of our workforce. So it's only going to affect 1% of the service that we offer. Or it's only going to affect 1% of the clients that we've got. And you may not realize that you're on the last part of this exponential growth curve. So don't wait just because, and don't ignore it just because it's a tiny percentage, because things grow exponentially. And if you ignore that, then you will be disrupted sooner rather than later. Okay, so that's my last message. Remember to complete the exit survey, and I'll send you the free chapter from the book, which is all about foresight and doing strategic planning. And thank you very much for being part of this webcast. Thank you for participating. I hope you got some value that you can take away and put into place in your organization. If you'd like to engage with me, please get in touch. And yeah, I will send you the recording of this later on today when I've uploaded it. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.